The three Britons who died in Italy's earthquake are named and mourned. 14-year-old Marcus Burnett was on holiday with his parents and sister. Maria and Will Henniker-Gottlieb died in the same building. Italy now confronts the staggering challenge and cost of repairing the wasteland. Also on News at 10 tonight. Anti-terror police in Birmingham make 5 arrests. The Army's bomb squad is searching the area. The plight of the children of Aleppo, Syria's bloodiest city. Huge cuts proposed to curb NHS England's burgeoning deficit. The experts say they're not enough. And
just before the show, the producer took me to one side and he left me there.
the work of Tommy Cooper, a national treasure preserved for the nation.
He said to me,
This is ITV News at 10 with Alistair Stewart.
Good evening. The joy of 2 family holidays was shattered at a stroke by Italy's earthquake. The Britons, teenager Marcus Burnett, and a couple in their 50s, Maria and Will Henniker-Gottlieb, are 3 of the 268 who have died in this natural catastrophe. For Italy, the mourning of so many has begun to give way to the task of reconstruction. The Italian Prime Minister pledged tens of millions immediately. Long-term estimates of the true costs are measured in the billions. That in a moment. First, Emma Murphy from the heart of the earthquake region.
The drive towards Somati gives some indication of how hard the earthquake hit these tiny mountain villages. Collapsed houses falling into the road, creating a tunnel effect in their disrepair. Most people in the village survived, but it was here beneath the rubble that the 3 British victims lost their lives. This was once Maria and Will Henniker-Gottlieb's Italian home. This summer the couple had invited friends to bring their children for a holiday. And so it was that here 14-year-old Marcus Burnett from London also lost his life. His mother Anne-Louise suffered facial injuries and his father Simon sustained a broken leg. Nando Benani owns the restaurant next door. He tried to dig the families from the rubble. He told me those sleeping upstairs survived when the house collapsed and that neighbours eventually brought in a digger to try and recover the others. We all went, all the neighbours, and we could hear voices as we dug with our hands. They were deep beneath the rubble though. We tried to help the injured and we were shouting Maria and Will, but there was no answer and we realised that they were dead. The garden is littered with the trappings of life when it was fun and simple. Those who were here when it changed fear it will never be so again. That's a feeling shared by many in this area. Such is the damage now that there is a chance whole towns will need to be razed to the ground. For now, with such vast areas of damage being compounded by aftershocks, the focus can only be on keeping the rescue operation underway. Such is the damage to the infrastructure, the mayor of Amatrice today warned that further shocks could leave the whole town cut off. With the aftershocks of yesterday, but especially after those of this morning, the situation has worsened considerably, he said. From the point of view of the emergency services, we must ensure that Amatrice is not isolated, otherwise rescue operations will no longer be possible. That warning comes as those whose dead have already been recovered prepare for funerals. Tomorrow, a state mass will be held for many of those who were killed, as their families struggle to comprehend how fast nature changed their lives. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Somati.
The Italian Prime Minister has pledged £42 million to rebuild Amatrice and the surrounding towns and villages. But the overall cost of the damage is likely to run into the billions. L'Aquila was destroyed by an earthquake 7 years ago. So far, £12 billion has been spent rebuilding the city, but that work is still not finished. 8,300 people are still living in temporary homes. That is 10% of the population. A short time ago, I spoke to Emma Murphy and asked her if Italy will be able to handle this catastrophe any more smoothly or quickly.
Well, when I've been speaking to people here about what they feel about that question, they're quite clear. No, they don't expect it to be any more efficient this time than it has been on all those other occasions. And make no mistake, Italy has had an awful lot of earthquakes over the past generations, and they haven't really been dealt with. It might be a massive economy, but it also has very significant financial problems, and these are very expensive issues to try and deal with. We have entire towns that are completely broken, and it is going to cost millions, if not billions, to try and put them back together again. And of course, there is then the question whether or not they should be put back together. Places like L'Aquila, just down the road, which was affected so badly in 2009, have really not had any great improvements. They're there, but they're still very badly damaged, and they're turning almost into ghost towns, towns where only old people live because the young have gone away. They don't believe there's any future. So to be honest, the feeling here in this town and in many others that I've spent the last few days in is that their future is gone as a result of this earthquake.
Emma Murphy speaking to me a little earlier from Samati in Italy. Here, dozens of people on a street in central Birmingham have been told to stay indoors after an army bomb disposal team was called in following terror arrests in the area. Ben Chapman is live for us now at the scene. Ben.
Well, some 7 hours after police first descended on this street in huge numbers, an army bomb disposal team is just finally starting to pack up, ready to leave. What we've seen over the last few hours is soldiers as well as police forensics officers going in and out of an industrial unit about halfway up this dead-end street. We think it could be a warehouse or a garage, and although the cordon has been relaxed considerably since I first arrived here this evening, at one stage they were using a robot. Now, police say they've been here as a precaution following one of the arrests they made this afternoon. 5 men aged between 18 and 37 arrested both here and in Stoke-on-Trent on suspicion of the commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. Certainly a very serious offence, one, frankly, that we don't see people being arrested for all that often. The police haven't said much more about exactly what they're suspected of doing, but we understand it is Islamist related. Those men are still being questioned, and a number of properties are also being searched tonight.
Talking of properties being searched tonight and the involvement of the bomb squad, give us some sense of that part of Birmingham where you are and that is in the eye of the storm.
Well, although this is quite a rundown industrial street, it is right on the edge of the city centre. We've had Friday night partygoers passing by this evening asking what's been going on. A hotel, which is just about 100 yards from here, people there were told to stay indoors for a couple of hours this afternoon while the police activity was at its peak. I spoke to one chap who lives not far from here. He described it as crazy and frightening this afternoon.
Ben, thank you. There's been an axe hanging over the NHS in England since last October, when the Health Service was told it would have to find £22 billion in efficiency savings. Well, today we began to see where that axe might fall. Local NHS providers were asked to identify which of their services were unsustainable and perhaps should be centralised. That list was meant to be kept under wraps until October, but it was revealed today, shocking those who suddenly found that their local wards, A&Es, even entire hospitals might close.
The warning lights are flashing in England's NHS, a service having to save £22 billion in 5 years, while dealing with chronic staff shortages. Leaked plans reveal that savings means closures.
We found evidence across England of plans to cut, change and in some cases close frontline services, so things like GP surgeries, like A&Es and like hospital beds.
But is it fair to say that a lot of these plans are hypothetical to a certain extent, therefore they're doomsday scenarios, aren't they?
This is not a piece of ideological research. This is a really comprehensive audit done by health experts.
The leaked plans suggest that in northwest London a £1 billion shortfall would mean cutting 500 beds. In Leeds, 5 wards would be at risk of closing, and the number of acute hospitals in Leicester would be reduced from 3 to 2.
Leicester is very unusual if you look at a city of that size and still having 3 hospital sites that run. That's not very efficient in terms of workforce and staffing rotas across those sites.
So the sense that these plans are more than just draft ideas, despite the Department of Health insisting nothing is final. At this central London hospital, the savings would be made by closing down the A&E department. And it's the suggestion of cuts to frontline services which only underlines the urgent nature of the political drive to ease the funding crisis in the NHS. Earlier this week, ITV News revealed that 16 trusts in England had been forced to close or suspend essential services because of staffing problems during the last year.
There's a real risk that pressures that the NHS face will get greater, that services could cut, and that patients will find it harder to get an appointment with their GP or to get an appointment at the hospital.
And even if NHS managers hit the target of 22 billion in savings, will it be enough?
At the end of the 5-year period covered by these plans, the NHS will face on a year-by-year basis a new funding gap emerging as the population continues to age and new medical treatments are invented that we have to offer to patients.
Labour and other opponents of the government's NHS policies argue that any funding crisis is caused by political choice.
And it is intensely political. First, what are Labour saying about it tonight?
Well, I was listening to Jeremy Corbyn outlining his NHS policies this week. He talked about the NHS being starved, robbed, in deep crisis. He blames the private deals that have been signed. He says we're spending $2 billion a year on these private deals. He says the private sector is milking the NHS. He would increase corporation tax, he says, to produce more funding for the NHS. So really blaming the costs of agency staff as well and the private sector, and insisting this is a Conservative plan to dismantle the NHS and bring the private sector in to fill the gaps.
Look, Theresa May back from holiday now. Is this going to prove as big a headache for her as it did for David Cameron?
It's a headache for other prime ministers too. I mean, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, for example, they've all been dealing with this simply because every year the NHS has to do 3% more than the year before. We're all living longer, there are more of us. Those are the facts. It doesn't really matter which political party is in power. It's simply the facts of population growth are pushing the cost. The demand is outstripping supply, if you like. So, you know, Theresa May has to come back and immediately, Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, he's due to sign off on all these draft proposals in October. There's got to be consultation. This will be in her in tray. This is something she's going to have to deal with immediately. And you can sense the urgency around this. If the proposals, as we've seen them today, come into fruition, actually become reality, those are real cuts to frontline services. And remember, Theresa May in Downing Street said that she would help the struggling. And the NHS services talked about A&E departments, etc. I mean, they are the ones which really help the struggling in our society, the elderly, children and people who are chronically ill.
Angus, thank you. The United States and Russia were back around a table today trying to thrash out some way of bringing the horrors happening in Syria to an end. They say that they are close, but while US Secretary of State John Kerry and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov talk in Geneva, the children of Aleppo continue to suffer. The besieged city is one of the deadliest places to be a child in Syria. News at 10 has learnt that this week alone, 127 children have been brought into the emergency ward of just one hospital. On average, 3 children are dying across Aleppo every day, and it is growing worse. More killed so far this year than in all of last year. A warning, this report contains images of children in distress.
Those who'll decide when the guns fall silent, when the bombing stops, should be made to look into these young faces. Afra Abuljud, 7 years old, killed while she slept this week. Her brothers Abida and Mohammed, 8 and 11, died in the same airstrike. Wasim Ajaj, also 11, fatally injured by the bomb that fell on his home. In 1 week, at least 25 young lives ended, while 3-year-old Riham Cairo represents more than 100 injured. Even as those with influence were preparing to talk ceasefire, the bombardment that shows no mercy to the young and vulnerable was continuing. These boys left mourning their brother Hassan, one of 11 children killed by barrel bombs dropped by government forces. Little wonder Save the Children made this appeal today.
Every day that goes by where there's still aerial bombardment and the siege is on is a lost day for a child in Aleppo city. So we are really hoping that the talks today lead to some tangible improvement.
One problem is that even in a city under constant bombardment, children will play. That's when many of them die. In Aleppo, this turns quickly to this. In the aftermath of an explosion, an injured child is carried away through the dust. The latest attack by Bashar al-Assad's forces and their Russian allies leaves this boy traumatized, and another who will play no more. It's a week now since this image of 5-year-old Omran Dagnish drew world attention to the plight of Aleppo's children. As well as discovering what's left of the home where Omran was injured and his older brother killed, ITV News has been compiling as accurate a picture as possible of the dreadful impact on a new generation of Aleppo citizens. Recovering in hospital, we heard from 8-year-old Abbas.
صار صواريخ على الضرب هيك عم وصار علينا طلعت أنا تحت الإنقاذ وطالعوني والحمد لله.
ما بتلعبوا برا بالحديقة انت برفقاتك؟
ما ولا لعبة على أول لعبة طمينة هاي السهلة نلعبها كله صواريخ.
Aleppo resident Abdul Kafi, who's been sending News at 10 eyewitness accounts, heard the heartbreaking story of Ali Abuljud, who lost 2 sons and 2 daughters in this week's bombing.
قلت لهم يا بابا إذا بدكم تطلعوا.
At our last meal, I told my kids there's too much shelling here. I should move them to the countryside, the father said. But his family said no. They should live or die together.
كلياتنا سوا أو منعيش كلياتنا سوا.
In a week that's seen 25 child deaths, we've also received remarkable pictures of a baby recovered alive from the rubble. A British aid worker sent News at 10 a rare glimpse of the basement of Aleppo's only children's hospital, where the premature baby unit was moved after the building was hit by bombs. 1 infant died in the attack. The survivors are now being cared for in sweltering temperatures. On social media, we watched the recording of a little girl's nursery rhyme interrupted. She escaped, unhurt, though thoroughly terrified. Before the week we'd been monitoring ended tragically, predictably, with loss and more trauma. Another week in Aleppo, and at least 25 more names are added to the roll call of a lost generation. 25 more young innocents for whom any ceasefire will now be too late. Paul Davis, News at 10.
The talks and the continuing plight of the children of Aleppo. In another of Syria's most desperate places, rebels and civilians have begun to leave the besieged Damascus suburb of Daraya. Syria's army surrounded Daraya, blocked food deliveries and bombed it heavily since 2012. An agreement was finally reached yesterday to evacuate around 4,000 civilians and 700 rebel fighters. Here, Surrey police are pressing on tonight with their investigation of a possible child abduction, despite no child being reported missing. A boy aged around 6 was apparently seen being pulled inside a black van in Redhill yesterday. But detectives are saying a black van they traced from CCTV was not involved, and a bike thought to belong to the boy is also in doubt. But officers are insisting the witness statement is credible and they will continue to investigate. The highest court in France backed the burkini today, ruling that a local ban on the Islamic bathing costumes breached the fundamental freedoms of those who choose to wear them. It is a blow to presidential candidate Nicolas Sarkozy, who had promised a nationwide bikini ban if elected, and the current Prime Minister, who called the swimwear a provocation against which France must defend itself.
Rarely, if ever, can an item of swimwear have ignited such a storm. These were the pictures that divided France and shocked the world beyond. A Muslim woman forced by a group of armed policemen to remove her clothing on a public beach. The burkini was banned by more than a dozen French towns for being overtly religious. The law had wide public support, but activists from one town near Nice took it to the highest court in Paris today. Judges ruled it should be suspended there.
It's against the civil freedom of religion, and now the decision of the Conseil d'État is final.
As absurd as all this may seem, it's important to remember the context. France has suffered a series of terror attacks over recent months. The country feels embattled and angry. These are extreme times in France, and many here believe they require extreme measures. But the Republic's great founding values, freedom, equality and brotherhood, are being tested now like never before.
I support without any hesitation the mayors who have banned the burkini to preserve public order. I ask for a law forbidding it on the entire territory of the Republic.
The burqa is already banned in France, and many here believe the burkini should be no different. It is a political provocation, they argue. But others see this as a cheap shot, a needless strike back at France's Muslim community.
We're happy with the court's decision. This ban just stirred things up. It could make an already tense situation violent. And what's more, it was unnecessary. It didn't solve anything. It made things worse.
There was little sign of stress at the man-made beach on the banks of the Seine today. Parisians enjoying some late summer sunshine. No burkinis to be seen, but that didn't stop the debate. We've been victims of terror in this country, he says, and the burkini is a clear symbol of Islam. That's why it offends people.
We live in a free country, so they do what they want. If they want to wear something like this, it's not.
It's no problem.
Yes.
As this country debates the best way forward, it's being forced to ask some difficult questions of itself. Martin Geisler, News at 10, Paris.
There have been violent clashes in Zimbabwe as police have fired tear gas and water cannon at protesters opposed to President Mugabe. Riot police fought running battles with protesters who threw rocks and lit fires in the centre of the capital, Harare. The former Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai was amongst those forced to flee. Anger has been increasing in recent months as the country's economy has deteriorated. But President Robert Mugabe said tonight mounting protests will not result in an Arab Spring in Zimbabwe. After the medals, many Olympians say it's all about legacy, encouraging more children to take up their sport. Double gold-winning gymnast Matt Whitlock, it seems, has hit the jackpot. So many youngsters have signed up to join his local club in Basildon that they are thinking of expanding. He returned there today for the first time since Rio. It was very crowded.
Matt Whitlock is a local hero. His return to the gym where he honed his double gold medal skills received a rapturous reception, with most of Basildon, of all ages, turning out to get a glimpse or a photo of him. He's probably nursing a repetitive strain injury tonight after the number of things he was asked to sign. Earlier, it had been just as hectic outside for those non-members of the gym, and to be honest, he was a little overwhelmed by it all. Did you expect anything like this when you were practicing in the gym all those hours?
No, I think you never do. It's good to come back. It's just unbelievable to see. You know, this place has supported me this whole journey. So to be here, see these guys, and yeah, I don't know what to say. I'm a bit speechless. It's amazing. Look how many people there are.
Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I think it's fair to say that going back to the gym has never been so popular. Max Whitlock has done something that no one ever thought was possible from a British gymnast, and everyone here is incredibly proud of him.
It's really proud. He's a brilliant inspiration to the kids in the gym. He is, isn't he? You love it.
I thought he coped with the pressure well and did what he needed to do, really. It's very busy here.
Whitlock has been so accommodating since he returned home from Rio. This morning, he even agreed to walk on his hands into the ITV News studios. His walk on his hands in Rio showcased an astonishing achievement. No Briton had ever won a gold medal in gymnastics before. He won 2. And it all started here in Essex, where, as an 8-year-old, he was already showing his talent. The gym is just overflowing with mini gymnasts. Every class is full, and Whitlock has ensured that it will continue to do so.
Well done. Excellent. You've just done a whole routine.
Jeff Davis was here in the beginning in the early 90s when he had just a handful of students. And since the Olympics, everyone wants to join the club.
Well, apparently we had 62 emails overnight. That was the day after he actually got the medals. And I'm just told that our waiting list has gone from 18 months to 2.5 years in a week.
Max Whitlock's success is filling gyms all over the country. It was standing room only today, and then some. Ian Payne, News at 10, Basildon.
And Max will be joining dozens of other Olympians tomorrow in what is being billed as Britain's biggest sports day. Sports clubs across the country are opening their doors, encouraging people, young and old, to get out and try something new. And finally, the Victoria and Albert Museum have acquired Tommy Cooper's joke file, just like that. Quite a status for a man initially rejected at audition as unattractive, indistinct and of an extremely unfortunate appearance. But Britain learned to love him, his quirks, foibles and mastery of mayhem. Now we can all enjoy the biggest collection of his memorabilia in existence. From the era of black and white TV to his death on stage in 1984, Tommy Cooper was comedy.
Just before the show, the producer took me to one side and he left me there. He said to me, he said, "How do you feel tonight?" I said, "Well, I feel a little bit funny." He said, "Well, get out there before it wears off." Hovering glasses. Trading cards. Look, see that glove? Second hand.
The V&A have acquired a meticulous index file of gags, cleverly constructed props and detailed script notes, all showing how carefully the madness was choreographed. Those who take their comedy seriously acknowledge the talent and the mark he left.
I think he was just so special. Anything he said was funny. Anything, the way he said it, had a delivery that no one else ever had, and no one has had since.
Stop! Stop! Well, pull it. Another saying will vanish in front of your very eyes. And you... Oh, my feet are killing me. They are, every night when I'm lying in bed, they get me round the throat like that, trying to straighten.
And to today's comics, Cooper...
style of comedy is anything like his, but I always remember one joke he used to do when he was in a taxi getting driven home from the driver. He used to say, "Do you know what, fella? I've had such a good time. Have a drink on me." And he'd reach forward and give him a tea bag. And that used to be classic Tommy Cooper. Love him.
And I said, "I'm going to pay it up there." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll X-ray it." So you get these little tiny X-rays like that, a little small one like that. And you put it up there like that, and you hold it there like that. And I'm sitting there like that. And they bring this X-ray machine in, see? And it, like there. And it went... Oh. Just like that. And he took it out and he looked at it. And he said, "No wonder it hurts. You got a finger poked up there."
Quick look now at what's coming up this bank holiday weekend. The last branches of BHS will be closing down, ending the chain's 88-year presence on the high street. The last 22 stores will stop trading on Sunday. Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff will testify at her impeachment trial. She could be removed from office as early as next week. Sam Allardyce will name his first England squad ahead of the first qualifier for the 2018 World Cup. And more than 1 million people are expected at Europe's biggest street party. It is, of course, the 50th annual carnival in London's Notting Hill. That's it from me. Tom will be back on Tuesday. Until then, a very good weekend to you. Good night. Bye-bye.